You're listening to My Inner Teacher with Peter Sterios and Krystal Ariel. The answers you seek are within you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Peter Sterios. Welcome to the very first episode of My Inner Teacher podcast. This is a space where we'll unpack what it means to listen to that quiet voice within, the one that guides us when the world outside is loud. And I'm thrilled to introduce you to my co-host, Krystal Ariel, who will be joining us on this journey together. Krystal, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, I just want to say hi. I'm Krystal, and I'm really grateful to be here with you, Peter. I'm so honored and excited about everything that's about to unfold here.
Yeah, and the feeling's mutual. I want to share a little, prelude to the session today with the way we met. And to this day, it's one of those coincidences in life that I have experienced throughout most of my adult life, where just some random message comes through on Facebook or LinkedIn, and here's you messaging me with kind of a pitch to maybe get a job at Manduka as founder. And I was just touched, number one, by just you asking for what you wanted directly to someone you didn't know. And then you planted this little seed about this review of the Manduka Pro mat that you had created a video for on YouTube, and you encouraged me to watch it. And of course I watched it, and I can't tell you how many times, at least 2 or 3 times a month, I get these random messages from people who love the Manduka brand, and they have the best idea, so they think, of a perfect yoga prop, or they want to do a review like your review. And to be honest, I read them all, but I don't respond to them all because it's just too much. But there was something about your video. It was hilarious. Like it was so funny. And humor is such a big part of what I teach in terms of the energy of humor in a yoga practice, which is what I do normally in terms of practices, that this lightheartedness that humor generates in us is the same lightheartedness that yoga is designed to create lightness. And so, of course, for seeing your video like that, and then I was curious, like, who are you? What have you done? Tell me more, because I only read what's online. How did you get here?
Biology would say that. No, I'm just kidding. I'm so glad that I just want to say first, I'm really glad that you resonated with it, because humor is also very personal, and not everyone finds your type of humor funny. So it feels like I'm in good company with that. And so I'll come back to that. How did I get here? Well, I was born in Miami, and I want to say I lived most of my life asleep, as we do in the beginning. And then I found yoga around 11 years ago on Instagram. And it was just because I wanted to do all of those crazy poses. Started practicing at a studio where I later became a teacher. And did hot power yoga for a while. And then got into retreats. I moved to Mexico. That's where everything kind of changed, because in the beginning, yoga was very, on a personal and individual level, it was great. It opened me up. I want to say it ruined my life, because it broke everything, because it made me ask questions that I never asked myself before. And you start opening places in your body that you're like, oh, what's that? Is that supposed to crack? Is that supposed to feel like that? And I remember asking a lot of my teachers at the time, like, my chest bone keeps cracking. Is that weird? And a lot of them didn't really know the answer. They were just like, I guess it's just your body. That's what your body does. But one thing that was really evident was this separation of like the teacher is up here and the student is kind of down here. And I felt that a lot in my relationships with the teachers that I had. And then I felt like a lot of times with the students that I would have, like they would put me there. And it just felt like, my goodness, that's a lot of pressure. I'm a human being just like you are. And, I have a life, and I fart and I go to the bathroom and I burp and, so it wasn't until later when I got my 300 hour in San Francisco, I was training with Laura Burkhart. And she was such a breath of fresh air. Like, she was goofy and she was silly and she was like a little bit crazy, but the right kind. And I saw myself in that and I was like, wow, this is different. Like, you're not uber serious and like, I don't know, just, she was just so light. So I guess that's where the lightness comes from. And by the time I got around to Wellness Reviewed, it was just, I'm putting aside this need to sound a certain way, be a certain way, act a certain way, and just allow myself to be me. And it turns out I'm pretty silly and goofy and a little bit crazy, hopefully in the right way.
So what you just said, that quality that I recognized in your video, and then as I've gotten to know you over the last 8 months, you're totally unapologetic. It comes across totally unapologetic about who you are as a person. And that is such an important quality as we start to question our relationships with our teachers, our external teachers. And for me, that was also a stepping stone, that I had situations that I found myself in without a teacher that I had no clue what to follow. It forced me into looking somewhere else besides an external teacher. And then life, once you take that step, life tends to support, universe, whatever you want to call it, God, if you're oriented that way. It brings you things to support you on that choice to journey into that solo journey to the voice within, let's call it. And some of the things that it brings you are not good. They're not like peaches and cream or, 2-hour massage. It's painful stuff. It's life existential stuff that it brings you to test and to strengthen. And this is the territory that we're going to embark on in this podcast. We're going to have this opportunity to explore people of all walks of life who have made that step towards the center, towards the teacher within, in their own art form, their own profession, their own personal situation, even if they're caregivers or parents or whatever. And that's what excites me the most. The vehicle that I used to come to these awarenesses was yoga, and through mostly physical and some psychological trauma that forced me to rely on an authority other than what was outside myself. And I see that so much in you, and I've only really gotten to know you as we prepared for this podcast, and I'm so grateful to have met you. And also that partner with Israel is, thank God he has a big brain, So he's our tech support and puts all the stuff together so beautifully. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm really grateful. We are. And I'm also really grateful to have met you. And you keep surprising me. I remember I was listening to, Well, first of all, after I made that video, I started going down the rabbit hole because I realized I didn't know much about you either, other than you were the founder of Manduka. And so I learned about your book, which we have now, which Israel's reading. So I'm going to have to wait on that. But he gives me little snippets here and there. And I watched a video. I don't know if it was on some yoga platform, but you were sharing your story. Maybe it was Do Yoga or something like that.
Do
You were
yoga with
sharing your
me.
story. Yeah. And I was just thinking, you said how you were often the only guy in the class, and you just walked into a yoga class one day and saw this woman doing all these shapes, and you're like, yeah, I want to do that too. And did you play rugby? Am I remembering that correctly?
No. I'll share that story really quickly. I've shared this story so many times, but it always changes slightly as I get older. So those of you that are purists, it may deviate slightly. But I found yoga, or yoga found me, in architecture school when I was at university. And I was late to class, running through the rec center because it was a shortcut to get to where my architecture class was. And down this corridor, there's this door prop 3 inches open. And as I'm kind of fast walking, this door jarred. I just thought, what's in there? Even though I was late to class, I pull this door open and there's just probably 15 girls, college girls at 20s, and the teacher, who's in her 40s, a woman, all women. And I was like, no context for what I'm seeing. And I just, without any self-awareness, I said, what is this? Right in the middle of class. And so everyone turned and looked at me, and I thought they were going to be angry, but they weren't. They had welcoming eyes. Here's a man asking what this is. And the teacher quickly responded, it's yoga. Do you want to try? And that put me on the spot. And I'm sure my face turned purple and, red, blushed cheeks. But I said, yeah, I do want to try. I'll come back next week. I'm late to class. And I came back the next week. And man, after that first class, I was hooked. And I wasn't hooked because of the spirituality of it. I was hooked because of the physical challenge of it. And here I was, an athlete. I hadn't started playing rugby yet, but I played basketball, competitive basketball, and competitive skiing. So I knew what discipline was like. This was totally different, but also a discipline. And from day one, I felt this is something that's going to be with me for a very long time. Do you hear that noise in the background? A little bit of scratching, like a paw on the glass. That's my dog. I'm going to let my dog in. I'll be right back.
Yes, please.
Come on. This, my office here where I'm filming, is his favorite place to hang out during the day.
But now we have to see him.
Oh, okay.
Now we
You
have
ready?
to see him. Yeah. Oh, hello. Oh,
He's getting
so
some gray
cute.
whiskers.
What's his name?
Tuxedo. Well,
Oh
it's
my God.
Tux for short. And he's one of those amazing animals who is a guru in his own right. And, I've said this in interviews before about how in some of the lowest times in my life, especially after my primary teacher, who I studied with for 20 years, decided it was time to go for me. And my dog really was like my guru in those days. And dogs make it simple. They love everyone. They just, it doesn't matter. They don't love the cat next door, but they love people. And so that example of loving even the people that are difficult in your life, my dog just embodies and reminds me. And as he's older now, he's almost 15. And I just know that my relationship with this dog is coming to a close, and that any moment I have in when I was younger, I would have probably just kept him outside, but I kind of like having him here. And as long as he farts sometimes, but as long as he's not farting, we're good.
Yeah. Well, I can't smell it, so
Yeah.
it's fine.
So
Yeah. But talking about the inner teacher, because when you first told me about that, this is what I'm talking about, one of those little surprises, because we have a certain idea in our minds about people, and then I love being able to discover who they are and have all the fears proved wrong, because you were also so very light and not scary and not I didn't really expect, I kind of left the expectations, but when you said my inner teacher, I was like, this guy's supposed to be in my life, because I've been on that journey myself, or starting the what does that look like when you're being guided from within instead of from without?
this is so synchronistic in a way, meeting you in Israel, because I have been thinking about starting an inner teacher academy for the last 5 or 6 years. Through the pandemic, it was challenging to do anything that was, I just felt limited in my access to community during the pandemic. And the online community that I have is growing, but it wasn't massive. And I was more of an in-person yoga teacher. But there have been some disappointments for me in the way yoga education has moved in the West mostly, but also in India. I see the same things in India. And the tradition of the guru is still strong in India. And it kind of made its way, that guru, devotee relationship made its way into the West, and it survived for a while, but it's pretty much dead now, in my view of it, because there have been some abuses of that relationship that have really questioned this authority that, like you were mentioning, that we give away to the teacher. And the teacher is just like all of us. We're all human. We all have those challenges that we're working with. And how do we find peace with a relationship with someone who's a guide, but there's a limit to that guiding? And in the stories that I tell in my book, Gravity and Grace, the grace part of the word was this awakening for me that intuition is a vehicle for grace. You without intuition, grace is hard to recognize. And once you cultivate this sixth sense, so we have our five senses, and everyone knows these five senses. There's this implied sixth sense, which these physical senses of the first five, intuition is the sixth sense, and it's well researched and documented. And I referenced in my book an author who wrote exquisitely about these conditions to awaken intuition in yourself. And her language was exactly the language that I used to open up awareness with this inner teacher in me on a yoga mat. And it involves surrender, letting go of expectation, and this profound acceptance of things as they are in the moment. And if it's injury or trauma or any of these so-called negative things that happen to us in life, there is a reason. It's a mysterious reason. That's the thing about intuition, grace. It's mysterious. And how do we get comfortable with mystery? And I have cultivated this sense of relationship with mystery over the last 15 years, where I notice patterns, I notice coincidence, I notice meeting you guys, for instance, you know, just this quality that you possess that I saw through the video you produced. And as I got to know you, it was like, this is the perfect co-host for me. It was just like, oh my God. Then when I realized that you were with this person in your life who's
The brain, the
the
big brain.
and he's taking care of the things behind. Israel, if you're watching this right now, thank you, brother. You know, it's just makes it all possible. That's the miracle, the miracle of coincidence. And I have a quote in my book. I forget who the author was that wrote this quote, but it was, miracles are nature unimpeded.
Mm.
So when we surrender to nature as it is, miracles show up. And that's the excitement that I'm feeling. Maybe you're feeling it here, and you listeners out there listening to this, we're just beginning this process, and I'm already this excited. But we've got some guests teed up coming in the coming months that I don't know that well. Some of them I don't even know at all, but they've achieved things in their art form or their profession or their writing, whatever it is. And I can tell just from what I've been able to find that they've also had a similar process, a similar journey. And I'm curious myself to learn the language they used to get to that insight of where they are. Because I think we'll all be speaking the same language, more or less, that we all have this same experience of moving through the illusion that the authority is outside, and, you know, the turning that direction inward. And there's this word awe in the English language, AWE. And for me, the awness of this process is, it's hard to find words for it. It's like the night sky. And the little promo for the podcast, the lead into the video that we found online, it's the perfect lead in for what we're going to direct the conversation towards, is the vastness of the world, the vastness of the human species. And yet there's these points of light, these galaxies of light within us that bring forth joy. It literally comes down to joy or bliss, the Ananda in Sanskrit. And we can capture these little moments of bliss with any form of practice, as long as the practice is guiding us towards intuition and not through repetitive exercise routines or some dogmatic form of martial art or yoga, whatever it is. If the preliminary work isn't guiding the student towards their own voice, then it's an illusion. It is really doing a disservice to what you might call a martial art practice or a yoga practice. And ultimately, you know, I'm an artist as well in terms of architecture. And the buildings that inspire me and the buildings that I try to design, it's all about creating space, you know, space for mystery, space for curiosity, space for joy. And the vehicle that I used was yoga. The physical practices of yoga is what brought a visceral physical experience of creating space within myself. And it was only afterwards that I realized, wow, these are the same principles that I do when I design buildings, you know, like how to create space, how to make, you know, this connection between volume and inner experience. And that's the excitement that I'm continuing to have for where this conversation is going to lead us.
Oh my God, you said so many things. How am I supposed to respond to all of them? I remember why I reached out to you now, other than, yes, to try and work at Manduka, but I saw your video about wonder, those little snippets that you give before your practice, like
The inspirations.
yes. And we had recently come back from Disney. I'm from Florida. I would go to Disney all the time, but it had been quite a while, and I thought that was out of my system. But we went, and this wonder, like this awe, like you were saying, and it was this looking at life through the eyes of a child, and not in this naive and ignorant and silly way like a lot of adults tend to think, like, oh, I don't want to be childlike, but in a very Alan Watts, like just get excited about life again, see wonder in the sunrise, or feel the wind on your face, and you're feeling it for the first time, and wow, that's amazing. And I really resonated with that. And then you were saying earlier about how you want to talk to all these incredible people that we're going to be chatting with about what was it for them that initiated this innovation, or this path that took them down a road that no one's been on before. And I'm sure we're going to get a lot of different answers, but I wonder if it's pain, because I'm dealing with the shoulder thing right now, and I've had no choice but to switch things up. And I noticed that my body is doing a lot of these like wiggly things. It's just coming out of nowhere. And I know for you, well, I'm not going to assume, but did your initiation down this path of finding your own way have to do with when you broke your back?
Of course. I don't think there's many spiritual traditions that don't have stories about dark night of the soul, where some kind of obstruction or difficulty presented itself uninvited into your life. And I think in a modern Western society, we've been trained to avoid those situations. We've been trained to run from them or medicate them, self-medicate them, whatever it is. And yet the journey of mastery, it's those dark moments where most masters of any profession, any art, invited or uninvited, they've worked with instead of against or avoidance, worked with the situation to seek a new path. And the broken back for me was that path. It hurt to breathe. And I didn't want to take pain medication to breathe, because that had its own side effects. So I learned how to breathe without pain. And how did I do that? I noticed within a week of the injury, I noticed that the pain spiked on the inhales, and on the exhales, the pain lessened. It got lighter. And sometimes I was out of pain just for the duration of the exhale. And so that over hours and days of conscious breathing, because that was the only kind of movement my body was capable of observing. And it had on the inhalation cycle a real wake up, like, hey, that hurts. How do I breathe to minimize that hurt? And the solution for me was shorten my inhales and lengthen my exhales, which is ironic because obviously we need inhalation for oxygen. But what I found is if I inhaled the amount of oxygen into my lungs that I needed in about 1 to 2 seconds, I learned how to exhale that 3/4 full lung, which was all the biological need of oxygen that I had in 1 to 2 seconds. I could exhale for anywhere from 12 to 20 seconds. So that percentage of time that I was exhaling was, 85 to 90% of my time. That time that I was inhaling was only 10 or 15% of the time. So that majority of time that I was exhaling allowed my parasympathetic nervous system to release, to calm, to open, to dilate blood vessels that were gripped with tension from the pain, from the reaction, the psychological reaction to the physical pain. It was just like a straitjacket on my endocrine system and my circulatory systems and respiratory systems. But within that realization, within 2 or 3 months, I noticed movement starting to, more aggressive movement starting to come in. Aggressive, like sitting upright, when I say aggressive, compared to laying flat. And actually, laying flat this is funny. For almost the first month, I couldn't lay down on my back to go to sleep. I had to lay on my stomach on the floor with 4 couch cushions stacked one on top of the other. So I was like in an elevated child's pose on my hands and knees with the stack of cushions supporting my torso. That's how I slept for almost a month. And yeah, these are the kinds of situations that my mind was playing games with me in those moments of, it was depression. It was like, oh my God, my career as a yoga teacher is over. That self-doubt, that self-cycle that is really not great for healing. But with progress, little bits of progress in a relatively short amount of time, because I decided not to have the surgery. And the orthopedic surgeon said I was crazy, that if I didn't have the surgery, I was 38 or 39 years old at the time. If I didn't have the surgery, I wouldn't be walking by the time I'm 50. And, it's obviously I'm older than 50 now, and I'm walking just fine. So in hindsight, the broken back was the best thing that ever happened to me. The trauma of a broken back was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Side note, if you want to find out how Peter broke his back, you have to buy the book, Gravity and Grace, available on Amazon. Shameless promo, I'm just putting it out there.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I'm just thinking how you said that you thought you were having these thoughts of, oh, my career as a yoga teacher is over. And I think, they say humans are creatures of habit. And I think that's partially true. But I also think that we are curious, and we don't nurture that side enough. And we get in the comfort zone with like that this is how it's done. And especially if you come from a lineage like Ashtanga or, something that is very, very, very structured. And now you're in a position where that structure is gone. And what do you do? And where do you go from there? But it's a place where curiosity and innovation is born. And so
it's evolution. You're describing the evolution story. A species gets to a point where the resistance to live as you've been living is so strong that you either die or you adapt. And that's essentially this journey. And this is not an easy pill to sell people. Like, it's one of the hardest things. This is why the warrior's journey, the inner journey, is so challenging. However, we've just lived through 5 years of something where societies all over the globe have seen certain ways of living or institutions that we depended on for how to live and how to govern and how to seek medical advice, etc. I mean, the list is almost endless. That there's this realization, I think many people during the pandemic came to the realization that there's no one coming to save us, that we have to start taking more authority with the choices that we're making about how we live and what is a sustainable way of living where we're not dependent on the institutions that have kind of, in a way that some of the institutions have become untrustworthy. And I mean, living in America, it is really difficult, especially at the moment, because very few people have much trust in the government. And it's not about political party at all. It's both parties. And the beautiful thing about this situation is that we have to start recognizing what we share in common. What is it that we all share? And can we begin a relationship in that sharing as a healing process back to where we build strong, sustainable community? And from there, that strong, sustainable community grows as anything that you invest energy into, it grows. These realizations during the pandemic, I heard something and I believe it. The pandemic didn't happen to us, it happened for us. And that shift mentally, the opportunities that, even just this kind of podcast environment has been because people need connection. And if they're physically distanced and mandated from making contact, this is the beautiful thing here. This is where we can thrive through technology. And to me, it's exciting. It's opening up a world of possibilities.
Yeah. Speaking of technology, can you still see me?
You're a little fuzzy.
Something happened and I can't get my camera back on.
You know what I thought it was, Krystal? I thought it was because you had told me that when the time is about up, that this Riverside platform kind of does something to let you know that the episode's about to end. So
No, it
the
doesn't.
nice thing about this fuzzy screen, though, is my inner teacher logo in the bottom corner looks really good right now, Krystal.
I don't know how, but someone is calling me and it's getting through. So I'm gonna have to, and it's on do not disturb. I don't know what happened. I'm gonna stop it.
No, I'm not worried about it.
Mostly...
That's the one thing that I've learned during, the pandemic in terms of technology is the first year or so of teaching classes online, I was freaking out about, the volume or, I forgot to turn the mic on or blah, blah, blah. And now it's just, people are so used to this platform having glitches, and not this platform in particular, but just technology. They glitch. And how do you deal with glitch? Maybe it's time to go out and work in the garden. Maybe it's time to spend with your dog or your cat or your kids. Yeah.
Or go on retreat
or go on a retreat.
In person. Yes.
I do want to mention one thing here, since it's our first episode, is that the Inner Teacher podcast is a voice for the Inner Teacher Academy that we're launching this year. And the Inner Teacher Academy trainings are going to be all online except one in-person retreat somewhere in the world, either New Zealand, Europe, or the United States, where we'll spend a week together in person, but the rest of it is online. And I just want people to know that we've already got live events scheduled in May in Austria and in September, end of September in New Zealand. And we're working on a location in California as well. So this podcast is a great way for us to connect, but to also learn about opportunities to learn more. And that I'm also excited about.
Yeah, me too. Especially the one in Iceland.
Oh, and the one in Iceland that I forgot to mention. Thank you so much for mentioning that. I mean, what more beautiful places could you be? Austria, Iceland, New Zealand, and California. So it's important. The opening quote in my book, I have it right here, and I want to read it because for me, it's kind of ironic that here I am doing a podcast, and this is what I wrote in the startup opening pages of my book, dedicated to the people, teachers, and students who have influenced my life in a way no book, video, or podcast ever could, with presence. So this online format will allow us to structure a curriculum together, and then this once a year meeting at a beautiful place in the world for a week with, beautiful food prepared and accommodation and classes throughout the day. That's just like the cherry on top of the sundae, on top of the whipped cream.
I love that. I'm really glad that we're going to have more than one episode, because I have so many questions for you and so many things that I want to share, but we just can't do all of it in an hour.
Yeah, this to me has been a beautiful opportunity to kind of begin the process of this podcast. And I'm encouraged by, the lightheartedness of the talk so far. And not to say that it's all going to be like that, because, these Dark Nights of the Soul episodes are pretty intense, and there's a way to discuss it. Trauma is not an easy topic to converse about, but this platform is going to be an opportunity for us to unpack trauma a little bit. And what is it that we're still holding on to, even if the trauma happened 35 years ago? Like, is that true now? And those are the questions that I hope we can have a community discussion with, this kaleidoscope of personality and professions that are going to be invited on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I'm not trying to unpack my trauma. I don't think anybody wants that.
No, I'm unpack the conversation about the trauma. I'm
open to it regardless.
Yeah, the ability to discuss the current present state of this. I've done enough research to know that the hanging on to trauma is a real disease. And how do we use our own inner authority to overcome that grip on the residue of the trauma? It's the trauma has come and gone. It's the residue from the trauma. How do we reclaim the authority? And that's what I want to talk about. I don't need to know about, your dog dying or, whatever it is. And worse, not to make light of trauma, but we've all experienced trauma and death and divorce and physical and psychological abuse. So I could check off all those boxes. And how do we heal? That's even more important. This platform is going to be a conversation about healing from trauma, and not in a way that you might think. And what yoga has opened for me is a pathway that anyone can take the step towards. And I do want to talk just briefly about the icon for the Inner Teacher Academy and our podcast here. It's a labyrinth. And the labyrinth is this spiritual device, let's call it architecture, of a path. Unlike a maze is not as different than a labyrinth. The labyrinth is one entrance in and it's zigzagging back and forth, but there's no other decision to make except that first step to enter. And the path is what they call unicursal. It is only going in one way, not in the same direction. If you know the labyrinth, it changes, it flips you around, it turns, but eventually brings you, there's no choices to make because you're in it. It eventually brings you to the center. And that's the symbolic, iconic reason that we chose the labyrinth, that when you take that first step towards the inner circle of yourself, there's only one path. And that path is how to build relationship with resistance or discomfort or pain. How do we do that? How do we build a relationship with that? And that's the process. I often say in my yoga teacher trainings that the inner teacher is resistance. That shoulder that you're dealing with, Krystal, that's teaching you a level of awareness that is not vocal, let's say, pre-vocalized in your mind of, oh, shoulder pain. It's a condition or a language, that's a better word, that the body uses to communicate imbalance. There's some imbalance in your shoulder. And your journey into yourself is to figure out what is the imbalance in that shoulder. Is it overuse, underuse, repetitive use? Is it genetic? Because all of these things could contribute. And how do you adjust? How do you modify the way you're living or the way you're moving to bring balance back to the shoulder? And you described intuitively that you're doing all these kind of wiggly things now. And I would say that's a good start. And it looks like, because I've seen your wiggly videos online lately on Instagram, and it looks like you're having fun. So I would say keep wiggling.
Yeah. You know, I love everything about what you said with the labyrinth and the journey to go to the inside. And I was thinking earlier about trust and how when you were talking about trauma, like you said, we're taught to avoid the pain. Don't go to the pain. You want to avoid all of these bad things happening to you. But when you can get to the other side and see the thing as a gift because you've already moved past it, and like you said, all that's left is the residue. And maybe part of that healing is, I mean, we I don't want to say we all are seeking, but a lot of people seek purpose. Like, what is my purpose in this world? And maybe part of it is picking up those pieces of the residue. And lots of people in this world have broken their back, but not everyone has broken their back with the body that you have, with the skills that you have, with the experience that you have, with the life that you've had. And all of those things make for an environment that when you get to the center of that labyrinth, only you can create that thing, whatever that thing is.
That's right. That's exactly it. And that's why I felt limited by following an external teacher. And in a future episode, I'm sure we'll unpack that story a little bit, because I didn't choose to leave my teacher. My teacher kicked me out. And so that was trauma, in the Indian guru model, guru devotee, getting kicked out by the guru, that could potentially have been, a death blow, almost, traumatic, but it didn't turn out that way. And I think that there's this cultural bias in a way to do exactly what you just said about avoiding pain. And I've learned otherwise. I don't seek pain. I don't seek experiences that cause me pain. But life seems to show up sometimes in a less than pleasant way. And on a yoga mat, again, because I'm using yoga as the vehicle to explore and develop relationship with my inner self, this pain is, like you said, a gift. If you can look at your situation and see it as a gift, that's a huge step closer to the center of yourself. And I've been spreading that message for a long time, and I attract a certain type of student who's ready to hear that. I'm not looking for devotees. I'm not looking for people to follow me home from class, I'm just trying to show what I discovered so you guys can discover for yourself what the center of yourself looks like, and how can you use that to heal whatever situation you're in. And so, yeah.
That segues into this question that I was going to ask you about who is the perfect person, or who is Inner Teacher Academy?
Well, Inner Teacher Academy is for people that are seeking guides to help them on their own journey of self-discovery. And it doesn't involve much authority from outside of yourself. And it took me 3 years to write the book, Gravity and Grace. And I spent a lot of time cultivating and assembling language that was, number one, not esoteric, was simple English language guidance to create ultimately the tools you need to find space. Space is the element that allows flow. And this broken back taught me that it's not about force. No pain, no gain at the gym. It's not that. It's not about force. It's about flow. How do we create flow in our bodies? And how do we do that? We create it by making space. So for a river to flow, you have to clear the channel. If it's mucked up with weeds or rocks or dams or whatever, you've got to blast all that out. Okay, so how do we create that space? This is what I discovered with the broken back. Softness. Softness is what allows us to create space inside. And the connective tissue that I write about in my book is all about the properties of connective tissue and how connective tissue is multifractal, meaning it moves in every random direction there is. There's no logical geometric configuration of connective tissue. It supports our organs, our bones, our joints. It's actually penetrating organs, bones, and joints. They even recently discovered that bone is a form of connective tissue, a more solidified form of connective tissue. So in this ability to create softness, softness is three-dimensional. If you really want to understand this, when you think about stretching, I never use the word stretch in a yoga class. Stretching is two-dimensional: muscle origin, muscle insertion, contraction or release. That's it. That's all you get. Connective tissue, multifractal, there is no two dimensions, there's multidimensional. And softness, when you embody softness, it's multidimensional as well. It starts maybe in your heart and it irradiates out around the heart, through the back, through the front, through the sides. And that's the beauty of this process, that with your goal is flow. To create flow, you need space. To get space, you need softness in your body. And when you create softness in your body, it's like surrendering. There's these forces that help initiate movement. What are they? Gravity, hence the name Gravity and Grace, and your breath. The breath is always moving three-dimensionally. So this is, again, the terrain that we're heading is whether you're a yogi or an athlete or an office worker or wherever you are, you have a body and the body loves to move, and your body's nature is change. How do we influence change in a positive way in our bodies? Conscious movement, conscious breathing, conscious thought. And that's the elements that we're going to be talking about. That's what we're going to find for yourself in this process through the podcast, and maybe further on if you're motivated or inspired to do a training with us.
Well, I am really, really excited.
Good.
Yeah.
Does that mean you're going to come to one of the trainings?
For sure. For sure. It's happening.
You get a discount.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I get the whole coast. What's wrong with me today? My dyslexia is acting up. I'm the co-host discount.
Yes, right. Exactly.
Yeah. So, okay. Anything else that you want to mention before we start wrapping up the first episode?
I feel really good. Like, this was our first date together, and like, I want to do it again. I don't know about you.
Yeah. No, that's why I said I'm excited, because the conversation is just like, it's getting my cells, or if they had faces, they would be like,
yeah.
Like,
I think we could say, I don't want to give any names yet because we only have a couple confirmations, but we've asked professional athletes, professional dancers. We've asked fellow yogis on a similar path. We've asked celebrities that have, demonstrated their ability to innovate and create new art forms. I'm just kind of tickled to see how people are going to show up for this, and then who the audience is going to be that is ready for it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, there's a question here that we had that maybe it's the last one we can ask. Who's on your dream guest list? Who do you hope walks? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have very special relationships with people from every walk of life. And the beginning of my book, I asked about 30 people, professional people, friends, etc., in the world that I've met over 45 years of practicing yoga. And all but one of the people I asked said yes. And so my nature is to invite those people that supported my book with their, they read it, they got it, what I was writing. And Michael Fronte, for instance, is just a longtime friend of mine. I'd love to have him on the show. He's one of those people in my life that was there for a while, and we had a nice connection, and he was a big supporter of Manduka in the early days. So Woody Harrelson, another one, just a brief connection with him, but I have connection to people. So these are the kind of celebrity people that would be just kind of a hoot to have them on. But other people, to me, they're just my friends, people that I've come to know, and I want to share them with this audience. They're exceptional people that aren't that well known. And I find that relationship in that form produces the biggest surprises, the biggest gifts of these so-called ordinary people who have lived extraordinary lives.
Indeed. Well, it's time to say goodbye.
Yeah, it sure is. Krystal, I just was a delight sharing this platform with you. Yes. I look forward to just hearing it again and watching it for myself. And what I encourage all of you, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to learn something about us and about yourself. And may you stay open to the voice of the teacher within. Until next time. That's it for this episode. Be well and stay open to the teacher within. If you've enjoyed our time together, follow or subscribe and stay tuned for upcoming chats you don't want to miss.